I've been driving municipal transit for 11 years, and in that time I've learned that most of what goes wrong on a route doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in the paperwork. A crossed number, a shifted time code, a correction notice taped to the dispatch window 20 minutes before you pull out. That is how things change in this job. Quietly. Officially. Without anyone asking whether you are okay with it. My name is Greg Altman. I am 44 years old. I drive for Tri-County Regional Transit Authority out of the Bryersfield Depot, which services the eastern half of Harmon County and a few rural stretches that bleed into Polk. I've been on the late rotation since 2019, which means I mostly run routes between 9 at night and 4 in the morning. That is not a punishment. I requested it. You work nights long enough, you start to prefer the quiet, fewer complaints, fewer supervisors hovering around the yard. You do your pre-trip, you check your mirrors, you follow the sheet, and the road does the rest. Route 88 is one of 4 I am certified on. It runs north-south from the Bryersfield terminal through Granger, then out along the old state road past the grain elevator and the fairgrounds, loops through the Millhaven Park and Ride, and comes back down through a series of residential stops along Decker and Vine before terminating again at the depot. Full loop takes about an hour and 40 minutes if you don't hit any problems. After midnight, the frequency drops to 1 run every 90 minutes, and most of the time you are carrying air, maybe 1 or 2 riders between Granger and Millhaven. Sometimes nobody at all. I don't mind empty runs. Some drivers hate them, say it makes the night feel longer. For me, it is the opposite. An empty bus at 1 in the morning, headlights cutting through fog on the state road, the diesel ticking over at idle while you wait out a timed stop. That is about as close to peace as I've found in a while. You are alone, but you are on the clock. You've got a purpose, but nobody needs anything from you. There is a balance in that. The night this started was a Tuesday in November. I remember because Tuesdays were the lightest ridership nights on the schedule, and November meant the fog was already settling in by 10. I pulled into the depot at 9:40 for my 10:15 pullout, signed in on the board, grabbed my manifest from the plastic tray on the dispatch counter, walked the bus, number 1117, a 2016 Gillig low floor, one of the older ones in the fleet, did my circle check, tires, lights, mirrors, wheelchair ramp, fluid levels, checked the fare box, checked the destination sign, logged into the AVL terminal on the dash and confirmed my route assignment. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly how it always was, except there was a correction notice. It was clipped to the top of my printed schedule sheet with one of those small black binder clips dispatch uses. Just a quarter-page memo, the kind they issue when there is a detour or a temporary stop relocation. I've seen hundreds of them. They're printed on yellow paper, time-stamped, and signed by whoever's working the dispatch window. This one was signed by Carla Briggs, who'd been on the night desk for about 3 years. I didn't think anything of it. The memo read, effective 11/14, Route 88 northbound, revised schedule, after 0000, additional timed stop inserted between stop 4407 Deckerveen and stop 4412, County Line Road stop designation 409, arrival 0047, dwell 90 seconds. Proceed standard interval after dwell complete. That was it. No explanation for the addition, no mention of a shelter or sign installation, just the stop number, the time, and the instruction. I looked at it for a moment, and the only thing I really thought was that the numbering was odd. Our stop numbers on the 88 run sequentially. 4407 is Decker and Vine. 4408 is the old real estate office at the bottom of Ridgeway. 4409 should have already existed as the next number in the sequence, but there was number 4409 on the current sheet. It jumped from 4408 to 4412 at County Line. I'd never thought about that gap before. Probably a decommissioned stop from years ago, I figured. Systems like ours are full of ghost numbers, stops that got cut during budget rounds or route restructures, but never got formally deleted from the database. Someone probably just reactivated an old code. I asked Carla about it when I dropped my pre-trip sheet at the window. She was eating a granola bar and watching something on her phone. I said, "Hey, what is this 4409 edition on the 88? She glanced at the memo and shrugged. Came down from scheduling, probably a coverage request from the county. You know how they are. Where exactly is it? Between Decker and county line is just that empty stretch past the cemetery. Should be marked. If there is a sign, there is a stop. That was all she said. And honestly, that was a reasonable answer. New stops go in all the time, especially out in the rural stretches where the county board is always trying to justify transit funding by expanding coverage, even if nobody's going to use them. A stop in the middle of nowhere that sees 2 riders a month still counts on the federal report. So I let it go. I pulled out at 10:15, ran the first loop clean, picked up a few people in Granger heading home from the bar district, dropped them along Vine. Normal, unremarkable. Came back to the depot, used the restroom, grabbed a coffee from the machine in the break room, headed back out at 11:50 for the post-midnight run. And here is where I need to be precise, because when I think back on it now, the precision is the only thing I trust. I cleared stop 4407, Decker and Vine, at 12:41 a.m., 6 minutes ahead of the new sheet's 4409 arrival time. I was running slightly early, which happens on empty runs when you are not picking anyone up. I eased off the gas and let the bus coast a little, watching the road. The stretch between Decker and county line is about 4 miles of 2-lane state road. No streetlights after the cemetery. The cemetery itself is set back about 100 yards from the road behind a low stone wall, and there is a gravel access drive that leads to the maintenance shed. Past that, there is nothing. Just fields on both sides, a few drainage ditches, the occasional reflector post. In daylight, it is flat and boring. At night, especially in November fog, it feels like driving through something that hasn't finished being built yet. I watched the odometer. I watched the road, and at roughly the 2.3-mile mark past Decker, I saw it. A stop sign, not a traffic sign, a bus stop sign, one of ours. The standard green and white TCRTA marker on a galvanized steel pole, with the route number placard and the stop number underneath. I could read it clearly in the headlights as I approached. Route 88, stop 4409. There was a concrete pad beneath it, maybe 5 by 8 feet. No shelter, no bench. Just the sign and the pad and the gravel shoulder. I stopped. I opened the doors. The air brakes hissed. I sat there for 90 seconds, watching the empty road, the fog curling in through the open door, the interior lights buzzing that faint fluorescent tone they make when the bus is idling. Nobody was there. Nobody got on. I closed the doors and pulled away, and that was it. For the first 2 nights, that was the entire story. I stopped. I waited. I moved on. The stop existed. It was on the sheet. It was on the sign. It was in the system. The AVL pinged when I arrived and pinged again when I departed. Everything was logged. Everything was authorized. There was no reason to feel anything about it other than mild annoyance at having another timed hold on an already slow run. But there was something. I am not a superstitious person, and I am not the kind of driver who tells ghost stories in the break room. I fix the things I can fix, and I ignore the rest. But something about stop 4409 sat wrong with me from the beginning, and it took me a few days to understand what it was. It was the location. The stop was directly across the road from a gravel turnoff that I recognized. It wasn't marked with anything official. No street sign, no address post, just a narrow farm road that led back through a stand of bare trees to a property I hadn't visited in over 6 years. My mother's house. She didn't live there anymore. Nobody did. She'd been in the county care facility in Granger since 2020, after her second stroke made it impossible for her to manage on her own. I'd handled the paperwork. I'd moved what I could into a storage unit. I'd locked the house and left it, and I'd kept paying the property tax because selling it felt like something I wasn't ready to do, and not paying it felt like giving up on the idea that she might come back, even though I knew she wouldn't. I hadn't been down that gravel road since the day I locked the door. I hadn't wanted to, and I certainly hadn't told anyone at the depot about it. There was no reason my route, my schedule, or my stop assignments should have had anything to do with that house, but the stop was there, right across the road, close enough that when the bus was idling at the pad, if I looked through the passenger side windows, I could see the tree line where the property started. I told myself it was a coincidence. The county's a small place. Lots of routes pass near lots of things. I told myself the stop was just a coverage expansion, like Carla said. I told myself I was reading into it because I was tired, And because November always made me think about my mother, and because working nights does something to the way your mind finds patterns in nothing. I told myself all of that, and I almost believed it. The third night was a Thursday. The fog was heavier. I was running the post-midnight loop again, and as I approached the 2.3-mile mark past Decker, something was different. There was someone at the stop. I saw the figure from maybe 200 yards out, just a shape near the sign, standing on the concrete pad. I slowed, signaled out of habit even though there was no one behind me, and pulled to the curb, opened the doors. It was a woman, late 60s, maybe early 70s. She was wearing a dark green coat and carrying a plastic bag from the Family Dollar in Granger. She stepped onto the bus slowly, one hand on the grab rail, and she didn't look at me. She fed 2 quarters and a dollar bill into the fare box. Not enough for the full fare, but I wasn't about to argue with a 70-year-old woman at 1 in the morning in the middle of nowhere. She sat down in the first forward-facing seat on the right side, the one behind the partition, and she set the bag on her lap. I closed the doors and pulled out. I watched her in the interior mirror. She didn't move. She didn't look out the window. She just sat there with her hands folded over the bag, her face pointed slightly downward. She looked like a lot of the older women who ride the late routes, tired, quiet, dressed for the cold, not interested in conversation. But she also looked familiar in a way that I couldn't place. Not like someone I knew, more like someone who resembled someone I knew. The set of the jaw, maybe. The way she held her shoulders slightly rounded, like she was bracing for something. When I reached the next stop, 4412, County Line Road, she pulled the cord. I stopped. She got up, walked to the front, and as she stepped down, she said, "Thank you, sweetheart." Just like that, quiet, automatic, the way someone says it when they've been saying it their whole life. My mother used to say that. Not thanks or thank you, always thank you, sweetheart. To me, to cashiers, to nurses, to anyone who did anything for her, it was just her phrase. I sat at County Line for a long time after she got off. I don't know how long, the AVL would know. My hands were on the wheel, and the engine was running, and the doors were closed, and I was staring at the spot where she'd stepped off the bus into the dark, and there was nothing there. No houses within a quarter mile. No reason for anyone to get off at that stop, at that hour. No path, no car, no light. I finished the run. I brought the bus back. I wrote nothing unusual in my post-trip report, because I didn't know how to explain what was unusual. A passenger boarded. A passenger exited. That is what happened. That is all that happened. The next night, Friday, I was off. Saturday, I picked up an extra shift afternoon, work on Route 12, which runs through the commercial strip. Normal daylight driving, full buses, noise and routine, and nothing to think about. Sunday night, I was back on the 88. I'd spent the weekend telling myself that the woman at stop 4409 was just a woman. That, "thank you, sweetheart," is something thousands of older women say. That the resemblance I'd felt was just the fog and the hour and the fact that my mother had been on my mind. I'd almost convinced myself. The post-midnight run started clean. I cleared Decker at 12:43 and headed north into the dark stretch. The fog was lighter that night, and I could see the road further ahead than usual. I could see the sign from a long way off. No one was at the stop. I pulled in, opened the doors, started my 90-second dwell. I sat there looking out through the windshield at the road ahead, and then, I don't know why, I looked to the right, through the passenger windows, past the shoulder, past the gravel turnoff, through the bare trees. There was a light on in my mother's house. Not a bright light, not like someone had flipped a switch, more like the kind of glow that comes from a single lamp in a back room, filtered through curtains and distance and years of grime on the windows. A faint, warm amber that I hadn't seen since the last night I'd spent in that house. The night before I moved her to the facility, when I'd sat in her kitchen at 2 in the morning and tried to figure out what kind of son lets his mother live alone for 3 years after a stroke because he is too wrapped up in his own divorce and his own schedule and his own goddamn bus route to drive 40 minutes and check on her. The dwell timer ended. I closed the doors. I pulled away. I did not look at the light again, but I thought about it. I thought about it for the rest of the run and for the drive home after. And for most of the next day, I thought about whether someone had broken into the house. I thought about whether I should call the sheriff. I thought about whether I should just drive out there in daylight and check. And then I thought about how I'd have to walk through that door and see the kitchen and the hallway and the bedroom where she'd been lying on the floor for what the paramedics estimated was 11 hours before the mail carrier noticed the door was open and called it in because I hadn't called her that week, or the week before, or the week before that. I didn't go out to the house. I didn't call the sheriff. I went to work, Monday night. Route 88, post-midnight run. This time, when I reached stop 4409, there were two people waiting, the woman in the green coat and a man. The man was older than her, heavyset, wearing a canvas jacket and a ball cap. He had thick hands, and he moved slowly when he climbed the steps. He didn't pay. She paid the same short fare as before. They sat together in the front section, not speaking, not looking at each other, but clearly together in the way that people who've known each other a long time are together, sharing space without negotiating it. The man looked like my Uncle Bill, my mother's brother. He'd died in 2017 of pancreatic cancer. I'd gone to the funeral. I'd sat in the back row and I'd left before the reception because I didn't know what to say to anyone in that family anymore, and because my mother had looked at me across the room with an expression I couldn't read, and I decided it was easier to not find out what it meant. They rode to County Line. They got off together. The woman said, "Thank you, sweetheart." The man said nothing. They stepped into the dark and were gone. I want to stop here and explain something because I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like I am describing ghosts. I am not. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in fatigue and suggestion and the way the mind fills in gaps when you are running on 4 hours of sleep and bad coffee. I believe in coincidence and pattern recognition and the fact that when you are carrying guilt, everything starts to look like a message. But I also believe in what I can verify. And here is what I could verify. I checked the AVL data the next morning. The system logs every stop event, arrival time, departure time, door open, door close, passenger count via the infrared beam on the steps. Stop 4409 showed a door event and a passenger count of 2 for that run. The system saw them. The bus saw them. They were real enough to trigger the beam. I pulled up the stop in the scheduling database on the dispatch terminal. Stop 4409 was listed. It had a location code, a zone assignment, a service window. But when I looked at the creation date, the field was blank. Not zeroed out, not marked as unknown, just blank. Every other stop in the system had a creation date, even the ones from the original 1987 route plan. 4409 had nothing. I asked Carla when the stop had been added. She looked it up and said, "It has been there." Since when? I don't know, Greg. It is in the system. It is on your sheet. What is the problem? There is no creation date. So it is a data entry error. You want me to put in a ticket? I said no. I didn't want a ticket. I didn't want attention on it. I wanted to understand it without anyone else being involved, which I recognize now was exactly the wrong instinct, but felt at the time like the only safe one. Tuesday night, I drove the route again. This time the schedule sheet had something new. Stop 4409 now had a name. In the location description field, where it should have said something like State RD9 Cemetery Access or Rural Hold, no shelter, it said Altman Road. My name. My family's name. The gravel road that led to my mother's property had never, to my knowledge, been officially named. It was just a private access road, unincorporated, no county designation. But there it was on the sheet, printed in the same font as every other stop name, formatted the same way, as if it had always been there. I stared at it for a long time in the depot parking lot, sitting in the driver's seat with the dome light on, the engine cooling, the fog pressing against the windows. I stared at it and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to recognition. The feeling you get when you walk into a room and realize the conversation was about you. I drove the route. At 4409, there were 4 people waiting. The woman in the green coat, the man in the ball cap, a younger woman, maybe mid-30s, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. The younger woman was wearing a blue sweater and jeans. She had her hair pulled back. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been standing in the cold for a while and had stopped noticing. She looked like my sister Karen, who lives in Ohio now and who I haven't spoken to in 4 years. The boy looked like her son, my nephew, Aiden, who I've seen exactly twice in his life, once when he was born, And once at a family thing in 2021 that I left early because Karen and I got into it about mom and about who was doing more, and about who had the right to be angry, and about everything we'd been storing up since Dad died in 2013, and left us with a house and a mother and no instructions for how to be a family without him. They boarded, they paid, they sat together. They didn't speak. The boy looked out the window at the dark with the kind of blank concentration that small children have when they're past tired and into some other state, where everything is just light and motion, and nothing means anything yet. They got off at County Line. The woman in the green coat said, "Thank you, sweetheart." I closed the doors and sat there, and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, and I breathed for a while. I need to describe what the bus felt like during these rides, because the fear, and it was fear, I am not going to pretend it wasn't, didn't come from seeing the people. It came from the normality of it. The absolute, procedural normality. The fare box accepted their money. The seats took their weight. The infrared counter logged their presence. The stop buzzer sounded when they pulled the cord. Every mechanical system on the bus treated them as passengers. There was no cold spot, no flickering light, no static on the radio. The bus didn't care who they were. The bus just did what buses do. It picked people up. It put them down. It followed the route. And the route now had a stop called Altman Road. And the route was working. And no one in dispatch or scheduling or maintenance saw anything wrong. Witness day. I called in sick. I've called in sick maybe 6 times in 11 years. So when I did it, the overnight dispatcher, a guy named Pete who has been there since before I started, asked if I was all right. I said I had a stomach thing. He said okay, and assigned a cover driver. I sat in my apartment all day. I live alone. I've lived alone since my wife left in 2018, which was the same year I moved to Nights, which was not a coincidence. The apartment is fine. It is clean enough. It has a couch and a television and a kitchen I mostly use for coffee and toast. It is the kind of place that doesn't ask anything of you, which is what I needed then and what I thought I needed now. But I couldn't stop thinking about the stop. So I did something I'd been avoiding. I drove out to the property. In daylight, in my own car, the gravel road off State Road 9 looked the same as it always had. Narrow, overgrown at the edges. About a quarter mile back to the house, I pulled up in front and sat in the car and looked at it. The house was a single-story ranch built in 1971, painted white originally but faded to something like old bone. The gutters were sagging. The porch had a crack in the 3rd step. The front window had a cobweb in the corner that I could see from the car. It looked empty. It looked like exactly what it was. A house that no one had lived in for 6 years. I went inside. I still had the key. The air was cold and stale and thick with the smell of old carpet, and something underneath that was just the smell of a house that has been breathing by itself for too long. Everything was where I'd left it. The couch with the crocheted blanket. The kitchen table with the plastic placemats. The clock on the wall that had stopped at 3:17. And I didn't know whether that was AM or PM or what day or what year. I walked through the whole house. I checked every room. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was out of place. But in the back bedroom, my mother's bedroom, on the nightstand, there was a lamp on. The small one with the beige shade and the ceramic base that she'd had since before I was born. It was on, plugged in, glowing warm amber, exactly the color I'd seen from the bus. The power should have been off. I'd had the electric company disconnect service when I locked the house up. I was sure of it. I'd called them. I'd confirmed. I had the final statement somewhere in a filing cabinet. I unplugged the lamp. I stood in the room, and I listened to the silence of the house, and the silence was not empty. It was the kind of silence that is left over after people. After years of people. My father coughing in the morning. My mother running the faucet. Karen on the phone in the hallway, twisting the cord around her finger. Me, coming in the back door after school and dropping my bag on the kitchen floor and hearing my mother say, from wherever she was in the house, that you, sweetheart. Always sweetheart, even when she was angry, even when I didn't deserve it. I left the house. I locked the door. I went home. I did not feel better. Thursday night, I went back to work. I told Pete I was fine. I signed in. I got my sheet, Route 88, and stop 4409. Altman Road was still on the schedule. Same time, same dwell, same position between Decker and County Line. But there was another change. The dwell time had been extended. It wasn't 90 seconds anymore. It was 3 minutes, and underneath the time, in the notes field, which is usually blank or contains a code for wheelchair, accessible hold or transfer point, someone had typed hold for connection. Hold for connection means the bus is supposed to wait for a transfer from another route. It is standard at terminal stops and major cross-route points. It is not standard at a rural stop on a 2-lane road with no connecting service. There was nothing to connect to at stop 4409. No other route came within 5 miles of that stretch. I asked Carla. She looked at the sheet and said, must be a new transfer point. They've been talking about expanding the Millhaven connector. The Millhaven connector doesn't come anywhere near there. Then I don't know, Greg, it is on the sheet. Can you check who made the change? She typed for a moment, looked at the screen. System shows it as an automatic schedule optimization generated by the routing software. The software added a 3-minute hold for a non-existent connection. The software does what the inputs tell it. If the parameters say there is a connection, it builds the hold. I don't write the parameters. I let it go. Again, I let it go because the system had an answer for everything, and every answer was technically plausible, and I was starting to feel like the problem was me, like I was the one not making sense. I drove the route. At 12:47, I arrived at stop 4409. The fog was the thickest it had been all week. I could barely see the sign until I was almost on top of it. I pulled in. I opened the doors. There were 6 people, the woman in the green coat, the man in the ball cap, the younger woman, the boy, and 2 others I didn't recognize at first. An older couple, both thin, both dressed the way people dress when they're going somewhere that matters. Him in a button-down shirt with the collar slightly crooked, her in a floral print dress that looked like it belonged to a different decade. They boarded. They sat. They filled the front section of the bus in a way that felt organized, deliberate, like assigned seating, like they each knew where they were supposed to be. I sat there through the 3-minute hold. The engine idled. The fog drifted in through the open door, and I realized, looking in the interior mirror, that I knew the older couple, not from life, from photographs, from the pictures my mother kept on the mantle in the living room, the ones I hadn't looked at in years. They were my grandparents, my mother's parents. They'd both been dead for decades. My grandmother since 1998, my grandfather since 2003. I'd been young when they died. I remembered the dress. I remembered the crooked collar. I remembered my grandmother's hands, thin and spotted, folded in her lap exactly the way they were folded now. They rode to County Line. They all got off. The woman in the green coat said, "Thank you, sweetheart." She was the last one off, and this time, just before she stepped down, she looked at me. She looked right at me, and I knew her face. I'd known it from the first night. If I am being honest, I just hadn't let myself see it. It was my mother's face. Not as she was now, diminished, stroke, slackened, lost in the fog of a body that had stopped cooperating with the person inside it. This was her face from before, from when she was still herself, from when she could still walk to the bus stop and carry a bag and say "thank you, sweetheart" to a stranger and mean it all the way through. She stepped off the bus. She disappeared into the dark, and the door closed behind her with the same pneumatic sigh it always made, like the bus was exhaling, like the bus was breathing, like the bus had been waiting for this and was satisfied. I drove to County Line. I drove back to the depot. I parked the bus. I sat in it for 45 minutes after I logged out of the AVL in the dark, with the engine off and the parking brake set and the depot lot empty around me. I sat there until the first morning driver knocked on the door at 5 to ask if I was all right. I told him I was fine. I told myself I was fine. I was not fine. Friday, I went to see my mother. The county care facility in Granger is a flat tan building that smells like floor cleaner and reheated food. My mother's room is on the 2nd floor, at the end of the hall overlooking the parking lot. She has a bed, a dresser, a television she doesn't watch, and a window she sits next to in a wheelchair. The stroke took most of her left side and a lot of her speech. She can say some words, but they come out garbled, and most of the time she doesn't try. The nurses say she understands more than she can express, but I don't know if that is true or if it is just what they tell families, so we feel less guilty about the silence. I sat with her for an hour. I held her hand. Her hand was warm and dry and lighter than I remembered, like the bones inside it had been slowly giving up their weight. She looked at me. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. I wanted to tell her about the stop. I wanted to tell her that something was happening on the route, that the job I'd been using for 8 years to avoid exactly this, sitting in this room, holding this hand, being in the presence of everything I'd failed to be, was now dragging me back toward it in a way I couldn't clock out of. I didn't tell her. I just sat there, and when I left I said, "I'll come back next week," which is what I always said, and which I did maybe 1 time in 3. She didn't say anything, but the nurse walking me out said, "She asked about you." When? Tuesday night. Around 1 in the morning she woke up, which she never does. She was sitting up in bed and she said your name. Clear as anything, she said. "Greg's driving tonight." I stopped walking. I turned and looked at the nurse, a young woman named Dana, who'd been working the night shift there for about a year. She said that. I wrote it in the chart. I thought you'd want to know. She hasn't said my name in 2 years. I know. That is why I wrote it down. I drove home. I sat on my couch. I stared at the wall. I thought about the route. I thought about the stop. I thought about my mother sitting up in the dark at 1 in the morning, on the exact night I was idling at a stop named after our family, watching people who looked like everyone I'd ever lost file onto a bus that was just doing its job, that was just following the sheet, that didn't know and didn't care that it was collecting my dead. Saturday, I was off. I spent the day going through the filing cabinet. I found the electric company disconnect notice for my mother's house. It was dated March 2020. Service terminated. Final meter reading enclosed. Everything was in order. I called the electric company. Automated system. I punched through to a representative. I gave them the account number and asked about the service status. "That account is active," she said. "It can't be. I disconnected it 6 years ago. I am showing service restored on November 14th of this year." November 14th, the same date on the correction memo. The same date stop 4409 was added to the route. Who requested the restoration? The account holder. Margaret Altman. That is my mother. She is in a care facility. She can barely speak. She didn't request anything. I am showing the request was made online through the customer portal. I can't see the login details from here, but the request is in the system. I hung up. I sat there. I tried to think clearly. Someone had used my mother's account to restore power to the house. Someone had done it on the same day the stop appeared. The system had a record of it. The system had a record of everything, and none of it was wrong, exactly. But all of it was impossible. Sunday night. Route 88. I almost didn't go. I sat in the depot parking lot for 10 minutes before my pullout, and I thought about calling Pete and saying I was sick again. But I didn't, because I needed to see. I needed to know if it would happen again, or if the whole thing had been some kind of temporary glitch in my schedule, and my head and the county's electrical grid, and if I skipped the night I'd never know. I drove the route. I cleared Decker at 12:44. I headed north. The fog was thin. I could see the stars through the windshield, which was unusual for November. The road was empty. I reached the 2.3-mile mark. The sign was there. Stop 4409, Altman Road. But this time there was no one at the stop. I pulled in. I opened the doors. I sat through the 3-minute hold. I looked through the passenger windows, past the shoulder, past the turnoff. The light was on in the house again. Faint amber through the trees. And then the radio crackled. Not the dispatch radio. The PA system. The bus's internal speaker. The one I used to announce stops for passengers. It was off. I hadn't activated it. But it crackled. And through the static I heard something that was almost a voice. And the voice said, or I thought it said, or I told myself it said, "Last stop." The PA clicked off. The hold timer ended. I closed the doors. I pulled away. I want to be clear about something. I am not a fragile person. I have been through a divorce. I have been through my father's death. I have watched my mother decline in real time across a decade. I have worked through holidays and anniversaries and the kind of low-grade loneliness that doesn't kill you but makes everything taste like nothing. I am built for endurance. That is why I drive buses. The job rewards endurance. You don't have to be fast. You don't have to be clever. You just have to keep running the route. But the route was no longer just a route. The route had found something in me, or I had put something into it, or the distance between those two things had collapsed, and I couldn't tell anymore where the job ended. and the grief began. Monday morning, I went to see the scheduling supervisor. His name is Terry Ostrowski, and he has been with the authority since the 80s. I told him I had a question about stop 4409 on the 88. What about it? When was it added? He pulled up the route map on his computer. He scrolled through the stops. He stopped scrolling. Huh? He said. What? I don't see it. It is on my schedule sheet. It is on the sign. It is on the AVL. He turned the monitor toward me. The route map showed every stop on the 88 in sequence. 4407, 4408, 4412. Number 4409. There is no stop between 4408 and 4412. He said, there hasn't been since we restructured in 2015. Terry, I stop there every night. The sign is physically there. I have AVL logs. He looked at me for a long moment. He had the expression of a man who doesn't want to say what he is about to say. Greg, when was the last time you took any time off? I am not imagining this. I am not saying you are. I am saying you look like you haven't slept in a week, and maybe the sheet had a misprint. I'll look into it, okay? I left his office. I went to the dispatch window and asked Carla for a copy of my current schedule sheet. She printed one. I looked at it. Stop 4409. Altman Road was listed, clear as anything. 0047 arrival, 3-minute hold for connection. I brought it back to Terry. He looked at it and then at his screen, and I watched his face change. That is not on the master schedule, he said, but it is on the printed sheet. I can see that. I don't know how. Is it in the database? He checked. It wasn't. The stop number 4409 existed in the system as a decommissioned code from a route that hadn't operated since 1994. The original 4409 had been a stop on the old Route 6 line, which serviced the rural western part of the county. It had been deactivated when Route 6 was cut. Its original location was listed as Rural Sivan Private Road Fovidential, no address, no cross street, just the description. Can you look up the original location coordinates? I asked. Terry did. He read them off the screen. I didn't need to check a map. I knew what was at those coordinates. I knew because I'd grown up there. Stop 4409 had originally been a stop on my mother's road. In 1994, on a route that no longer existed. 32 years before it showed up on my schedule sheet, across the road from the house I couldn't bring myself to visit. On the route I drove every night to avoid thinking about the woman lying in a hospital bed 18 miles away, who still remembered my name at 1 o'clock in the morning. Terry said he would escalate the issue. He said he'd contact the software vendor. He said there might be a database corruption. He said a lot of things that sounded reasonable. I nodded. I went home. I didn't sleep. That night I drove the route one last time. Or, I should say, I drove what I thought would be the last time, because I had decided that after this run, I would talk to my union rep and request a route reassignment. I would tell them it was a scheduling issue, a technical problem, and could I please just drive the 12 or the 34, or anything that didn't take me past that stretch of State Road, 9 in the middle of the night. I cleared Decker at 12:46. I headed north. The night was clear. No fog, no wind. The road was dry and the center line reflectors ticked past under the headlights in a steady rhythm, one after another, like a pulse. I reached the mark. The sign was there. Stop 4409, and the stop was full, not just the pad. The shoulder, the gravel, the edge of the road. There were people standing along the roadside for maybe 50 feet in either direction, and they were all facing the bus, and they were all still. I counted as many as I could. There were at least 20, maybe more, men and women and a few children, different ages, different clothes. Some I recognized, some I didn't. I saw the woman in the green coat. I saw the man in the ball cap. I saw the young woman and the boy. I saw my grandparents. I saw faces that looked like school pictures, like the framed photographs from my mother's hallway, like the memorial cards from funerals I'd attended and funerals I'd missed. I saw my father. He was standing near the back of the group, tall, slightly stooped the way he'd been in his last years. Wearing the brown corduroy jacket he'd worn every fall for as long as I could remember, he was looking at the bus. He was looking at me. His face was calm. His hands were in his pockets. He looked like he was waiting for a ride. He looked like he'd been waiting for a long time. I stopped the bus. I opened the doors. They boarded, one at a time. Slowly, patiently, the way people board a bus in the early hours when there is no rush and nowhere urgent to be. They filed past me and they filled the seats. They filled every seat. They filled the standee area. The fare box beeped with each one, counting, logging them into the system. No one spoke. No one looked at me directly, except the woman in the green coat. My mother, because she was my mother. I knew that now. I had always known that. Paused at the top of the steps and she looked at me and she said, "Thank you, sweetheart." And I said, "Where are you all going?" And she said, "Home." She sat down, the last person boarded. A man I didn't know, old, slow, leaning on the grab rail with both hands. The doors closed. The hold timer was still running. I had 90 seconds left. I looked in the mirror. The bus was full. Every seat, every standee position, every face was still. Every face was someone's. Every face belonged to someone who had, at some point, been part of the world that had made me. The web of people and places and years that had slowly thinned out until it was just me and a bus and a schedule and a locked house on a gravel road. The hold timer reached 0, and the bus did something it had never done before. The destination sign changed. I didn't change it. The system changed it, or the route changed it, or whatever was running the route now changed it. I could see it reflected in the interior glass, reversed but readable. It said, "Not in service." Deadhead. A deadhead run is when the bus travels empty, out of service between the depot and the start of a route. It doesn't pick anyone up. It doesn't stop. It just goes. It goes from where it is to where it needs to be. Drivers call it running ghost, because the bus is moving but it is not really there. Not for anyone. Not for any purpose except the systems. The bus wanted to deadhead. With all of them aboard. It wanted to take them somewhere that wasn't on the map, wasn't on the schedule, wasn't in the system. Or maybe it was in the system. Maybe it had always been in the system, in the gap between 4,408 and 4,412, in the blank creation date, in the reactivated power, and the lamp that burned in an empty house, and my mother saying my name in the middle of the night. I sat there for a long time. The bus was idling. The passengers were still. The road was empty in both directions. The light was on in the house, beyond the trees. And I made a decision. I put the bus in gear. I pulled off the road, not north toward County Line, but right, onto the gravel, onto Altman Road. The bus was too wide for it, really. The branches scraped the sides. The mirror housings clipped the overgrowth, but the bus fit. The bus went where I pointed it, because that is what buses do. They follow the route. I drove up to the house. I parked. I opened the doors. They filed off, one at a time, into the yard, through the dead grass, up the porch steps. The woman in the green coat went first. My father held the door. The light in the back room was glowing amber through the windows, and the house took them in the way a house takes in the people who belong to it, which is to say quietly, completely, without fuss. The last one went inside. The door closed. The light stayed on. I sat in the bus in my mother's yard, and I cried. I cried the way you cry when you've been holding something for so long that you've forgotten you are holding it, and then you put it down, and your arms don't know what to do, and your chest opens up, and everything that was behind the weight comes flooding through. I cried for my mother, for the years I didn't visit, for the phone calls I didn't make, for the silence I'd chosen because silence was easier than apology, and apology was easier than change. And change was the one thing I couldn't schedule into a shift pattern. I cried for my father, who died slowly while I was pulling double shifts to avoid watching it happen. I cried for Karen, who'd been right about me, who'd told me I was hiding in the route, and who I'd punished with silence for saying the thing I already knew. I cried for the boy, my nephew, who was growing up without knowing me, and who would one day ask his mother why Uncle Greg never came around, and who deserved a better answer than the truth. When I was done, I closed the doors. I backed the bus down the gravel road, slowly, carefully, watching the mirrors, the way you do on a tight backing maneuver. I pulled onto State Road 9. I drove to the depot. I parked. I did my post trip. I wrote in the notes field, schedule correction needed. Stop 4,409 resolved. I went home. I slept until noon. It was the first real sleep I'd had in weeks. The next night, Tuesday, I drove Route 88 again. Post-midnight run. I cleared Decker and headed north. The sign was gone, the concrete pad was gone. The shoulder at the 2.3-mile mark was just a shoulder. Gravel and weeds and a drainage ditch, nothing else. The schedule sheet didn't list stop 4409. The AVL had no record of it. When I searched the stop number in the database later, it came back as it always should have. A decommissioned code, last active 1994, no associated route. The light in the house was off. I could see that from the road, through the trees as I drove past. The house was dark. The house was empty. The house was just a house. But here is the thing. 2 days later, I drove to the care facility. I sat with my mother. I held her hand. I told her I was sorry. I didn't explain what for, because the list was too long and she knew it anyway. I just said, "I am sorry, Mom. I should have come more." She looked at me. She squeezed my hand, and she said, slowly, with effort, shaping each word like it cost her something she was willing to pay, "You came." That was all 2 words. But I understood what she meant, or what I needed her to mean, which was that the route had brought me here. The route had always been trying to bring me here. Every shift, every midnight, every empty run past the dark stretch and the cemetery and the fields, the route was pointed at this room, at this hand, at this woman who had been waiting for me to stop driving past and finally stop. I still drive the 88, I still work nights, but I visit her every week now, sometimes twice. I sit with her and I hold her hand and I tell her about the route, the weather, the fog, the empty roads. She listens. She doesn't say much, she doesn't have to. And sometimes on the late run, when I pass the 2.3-mile mark and the headlights sweep across the empty shoulder where the stop used to be, I slow down just a little. Not because there is a stop. There isn't. Not because there is a sign. There isn't. But because I remember what was there and what it asked of me and what it cost me to finally answer. The route runs clean now, one end to the other. No unlisted stops, no corrections, no holds. But I leave the porch light on at the house. I went back and replaced the bulb and I leave it on, every night just in case. Not for them. I don't think they need it. But I like knowing it is there. A warm amber glow at the end of a gravel road, visible from the state highway if you know where to look. A light in the place where the stop used to be. A light that says someone still lives in the story of this family. Even if most of the family is gone, and even if the someone who is left took too long to find his way back and had to be rerouted by a system, he still can't explain, through a stop that shouldn't have existed, carrying passengers who had no business being on a bus at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, riding toward a destination that was never on any map. But they got there. They all got there. And so did I.